So I've wanted a short panel saw for some time, and I just haven't found what I was looking for on eBay. I actually did win one last year, late last year, but because of a shipping debacle, I never got the saw. I did get my money back, but I never got the saw. So my next thought was to build one, and I was thinking about going this route, but I really wasn't looking forward to filing all those teeth into such a thick saw plate by hand. So I sort of held off for a while and eventually decided to build one. So I went over to the Wenzloff Sons website to look for some ideas when I happened upon the partial kits that they're now offering, and I thought that looks like a really good idea and a good way to do this without having to build the entire saw plate from scratch. So I bit the bullet, saved up my pennies, and I went ahead and ordered a partial saw kit from Mike Wenzloff Sons. And what the partial kit consists of is basically whatever you want. If you want just the saw bolts, you can get that. If you just want the saw plate, you can get that. If you want the bolts and the plate. So you sort of build your own kit from the parts and get it the way you want it, so you can have them do as much or as little as you want. And the cost of the kit is dependent upon how much you ask them to do before they ship it out to you. So let's take a look at the kit that I ordered. Alright, so here's what you get in the kit, at least the kit that I ordered. So it comes with the saw plate, and you can have them punch teeth if you want. I had them go ahead and punch the teeth in the plate for me. You can get this plate without any teeth punched in it if you want to file it in yourself, but I figured, I think it cost me another $10 or something like that to have them punch the teeth and start filing the fleam into this saw. The $10 saved me the work of filing all these teeth in by hand. Now the saw has not had the final sharpening done, and these teeth have not been set, so I'm going to have to sharpen and set the saw after it's built. But the teeth are punched, and actually this would be a great way to learn how to sharpen saws if you're apprehensive about picking up an old saw because you don't want to get involved in reshaping badly misshaped teeth. Picking up one of these kits would be a really great idea, because what you end up with is a plate that already has perfectly spaced and shaped teeth punched into it, and all you have to do is the final sharpening and setting. So it's a great way to learn how to sharpen a saw. So I get the saw plate. This is a 20-inch 10-point saw plate. It's going to be a cross-cut saw, so I had them start the fleam, and I'll finish filing the fleam and setting. And then 3 saw bolts and split nuts, and this one actually comes with 2 different sizes. There are 2 half-inch, 2 9/16 it looks like, and 1 half-inch. And then you also get a handle pattern in the style that of your choosing. So now if you want, you can have them include a handle blank for you already sawn out, and all you have to do is do the final shaping of that handle. But what I did was decided to make my own. So I started off with a piece of walnut, fairly straight grain. I've got a couple knots here, but I'm not going to use this section. So, and I took that walnut and planed it on 2 faces, and then I cut out the pattern and I glued it on. And what I did was I glued the pattern on just with a child's part glue stick. And you can find these in the supermarket or Walmart or whatever. I like the glue sticks because you can really get glue, a really thin coat of glue on the paper. The glue stick doesn't cause the paper to shrink and crumble up and crinkle as it dries like some water-based glues will. So you can really get a good thin layer on there. You can use spray adhesive, you can use white Elmer's glue, but if you use the white Elmer's glue, just make sure to put just a little bit of glue on there. Spread it thin, don't get the paper too wet because it tends to shrink and crinkle as it dries if you do. So once we have the handle pattern in place, the next thing we want to do is bore the holes for the saw bolts before we start shaping this. And just one quick note too, when you're setting this handle pattern on, take note of the way the grain is running in your board, because you want to orient this handle so that the grain is running straight through the weakest parts of this handle. So I've got this pattern turned slightly so that this angled grain is running straight through the weakest section here and here. So this grain is actually running angled slightly straight through these thin areas, and that way you're getting the strongest part of the grain running through the thinnest areas to keep that handle good and strong and keep it from breaking at those weak spots. So the first thing we want to do is to locate the holes for the saw bolts. So the first thing I need to do is to locate where each of these saw bolts are going to go on both sides of this stock. So I don't want to just go ahead and start drilling the counter bores for the heads. I'm going to start with the smallest drill bit that I have, and I'm going to drill all the way through. Now what's important here is that you get these accurately located and you bore straight through. Now if you're not comfortable doing this with an egg beater drill or a hand drill, you may want to do this on the drill press, because you want to try and get these holes as perfectly plumb as possible. I'm fairly comfortable doing it this way, so I don't, I'm going to do it with the egg beater. But again, try and get these holes, these starter holes, as plumb as possible, because this is going to locate the bolts on both sides so that we can bore the recesses for the saw bolts. All right. Now once you've got the holes bored all the way through, it's important to note which bolts are going where. Now as I mentioned, I've got two that are 9/16 and one that is a 1/2 inch. So I'm going to locate the 1/2 inch here at the top in the thinnest section, and the two 9/16 here and here. And don't get thrown off by the size of these, because these circles that are drawn here aren't necessarily the size of the saw bolts that you're going to get. And do the same thing on the back, making sure you note what size each of these holes is so you don't get them mixed up. Now we can go ahead and start to bore these counter bores for the heads of the screws. Now I'm going to start with the 1/2 inch, and I'm going to bore this very shallow, because really all I'm looking to do, I don't want to bore the full depth of the head of that bolt just yet. And I'm actually not going to bore the full depth of the head of that bolt at all. I'm just going to bore just enough to sink it, because later on we're going to file the top of this. Do the same thing on the back side. So now I'm going to switch over to the 9/16 and I'm going to bore those holes. Again, same thing. Once I have the counter bores done, then I'm going to use a slightly larger bit and I'm going to chase the holes for the screws themselves. So the next thing I want to do is to take a small chisel and looks like I'm going to go with something about 1/4 of an inch, and I want to chop a recess in there for this small square section. And I just sort of do this by eye, sort of outlining the hole with the chisel and sneaking up on the fit a little at a time. So after I bored the holes for the bolts, I bored a few other holes, through holes, in some of the tight transition areas just to help me with sawing. And now I'm going to go ahead and saw out the general outline, and I'll start by sawing out this straight section here.
once I have the handle shape sawn out, then I'm just going to use, whatever tools I have to bring the rough saw marks down to the pattern lines. Spoke shave, gouge, rasp file, scraper, plane, whatever you have, just to clean up this rough saw marks and bring everything down to the pattern line before we start actually rounding anything and shaping it to fit your hand.
Alright, now once I have the saw cuts all faired, before I go doing any of the rounding and shaping of this handle, I want to cut the slot for the saw plate. So I'm just going to use a marking gauge, and I've set it up so that it splits this in half. And you can see the pattern has a line on it where the plate comes up to. So I'm just going to scribe up to that line. And I'm going to do it all the way around the handle. Alright, now I'm going to saw the slot out. One of the challenges here is actually finding a saw that's going to have the right kerf for the saw plate that I'm going to use. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start by using my tenon saw. But one of the benefits of having the saw plate, having the teeth cut in the saw plate, but not having any set to the teeth yet, is that you could actually just use this plate to go ahead and saw. In the case of this particular saw plate, the teeth are cut in and the fleam is started anyway. So it will cut. It's just difficult because there's no handle on here yet. And what you could do is clamp a couple of blocks, wood blocks on here to act as a handle, and actually just use the blank saw plate to cut. I'm going to use my tenon saw to start the cut. And then what I'm probably going to do is end up widening it with the saw plate that's going to go in here. Take your time and get this nice and straight. Look like a saw. Alright, now with the plate fit, and actually my tenon saw kerf was the perfect thickness to cut for this plate. And with the plate fit into the handle, the next thing I want to do is mark the holes that I have to drill in the saw plate. Now that the slot is cut for the saw back, I want to mark where I need to drill the holes. So I'm just going to use the drill bit that I'm going to use to drill the holes. And it's not going to leave a deep mark, but it'll leave a little scratch where I need to drill. And then take the saw plate off, and I'm just going to use this spring-loaded center punch. I'm going to find that little scratch that I made. Carefully put it in place and punch it a couple times. Just to mark that position. Now, believe it or not, you actually can drill through this steel plate with nothing more than just a simple egg beater drill and a sharp drill bit. Just take your time and go slow, and I'm using a little bit of honing oil to lubricate the bit. And I'm just going to find that center punch with the tip of the bit and take my time. Now here's a little trick Mike Wenzloff told me about. It actually helps if you start with a smaller bit. To start the hole, the bit goes through easier and doesn't wear out as quickly, and that saves your larger bit that you can then chase the hole with the larger bit, and it tends to last longer that way. You don't dull your bits as quickly, and the work goes a little bit easier. Now I'm sure Mike and his crew are using a drill press to do this, or actually I believe they're punching their holes now. They're not drilling them, but when they were drilling, they would use 2 drill bits, and it helps make the job easier and cleaner. So the holes are drilled. Everything fits nice and tight. I've got it attached with the saw bolts and the split nuts, and everything lines up and fits well. So now it's time to go ahead and finish the shaping of the handle. It's starting to turn out nice. Now the handle pattern has guidelines for shaping. On this side you can see the black and red lines to guide where to shape down to. But because the pattern's not on this side, there's no lines on this side. So I'm just going to use my finger as a fence to gauge where the lines are on the pattern side. And I'll flip it over and I'll make similar lines on the other side. And again, these are just as a guide. Ultimately, I'm going to be seeing how this pattern feels, how the handle feels as I shape it. So I'm not really going to be just shaping to the pattern lines. I'm going to be checking the fit constantly to my hand because I'm the one that's going to be using the saw. So rather than just shaping it generically to, arbitrary lines, I'll shape it so that it fits my hand well. So I've got the pattern lines all transferred to the other side. So now it goes back in the vise, and we go back to rasp and file and spoke shave, scraper, whatever tools you got to bring this to final shape and fit it comfortably to your hand.
Like I said, as I go along, I'm constantly stopping to check to see how the handle fits my hand, and I'll make adjustments and take material off where it's not feeling comfortable to me. And I just kind of blend everything around, focus mostly on the area where my hand is going to hold the handle, because the rest of the shaping really is just for looks. Then I finish up with a little bit of 220 sandpaper just to smooth everything out. And one of the things that I like to do is to remove any of the sharp or crisp edges around where my hand is holding. Some people like that look where you have the crisp, sharp edges, but to me it's uncomfortable and causes blisters, when you're doing a lot of sawing. So I like to really sand everything smooth and transition it well. And I'm going to assemble the saw again. And because I left those saw bolts sticking up just a hair above, I'm going to file them down flush on both sides. And then after I file them flush, I'll again finish up with a little bit of sandpaper to finish flushing them up and clean up the file marks and make everything nice and shiny and polished and ready for a finish.
Now my favorite finish for tool handles is nothing more than linseed oil, several coats, or a good soaking, followed by a rub out with some steel wool and wax. I don't like film finishes on tools. I think they slip when your hands get sweaty. They tend to get slippery, and I think they cause blisters. I have an axe handle that has a film finish on it, and it's terrible. Causes real nasty blisters that really need to strip that handle. So the easiest way that I know of to do this is just to take like a freezer bag. You can even use a smaller bag for a smaller handle. And I just have a mixture of linseed oil and turpentine, and I'm just going to pour it in over the handle and seal this up, get all the air out. And I'm just going to sort of let this handle soak in here for a good half hour to an hour. I want it to suck up as much of the oil as it can. And I'm going to turn it every once in a while and coat it real well. I don't want the oil to dry yet. That's why I put it in the bag, or you can use like a Tupperware, a small flat Tupperware container and completely cover it with oil. I usually just stuff it in a bag like this, and I'll swish it around every once in a while, get everything good and coated, and so it really sucks up lots of oil. And then once this oil is all absorbed, I'll take it out, wipe off the excess, let some more of the oil leach out, because you probably get more of that oil leaching out for a good 15 minutes after any excess oil. Come back, wipe the excess oil off again, as many times as you need to, as long as that oil keeps leaching out. Keep wiping it off. Once the oil stops leaching out, just set it aside to dry for a day or two, and then we'll come back and assemble the saw for the last time. And while this handle is soaking, I can go ahead and sharpen up the saw plate.
Now, since I had the teeth cut in this by the folks over at Wenzloff Sons, I don't have to worry about cutting in new teeth, so all I have to do is sharpen and set. So I start by setting. I start at the heel and work my way towards the toe, and then I joint once or twice with a flat 6-inch mill file, just to even up the tips of all those teeth, and I don't really have to worry about this. And then go ahead and file, and in the saw sharpening video I used a guide block to guide the angle of my file, but here I'm not worrying about it because I'm just following the angles that are already punched in. And then the last thing I do is to side joint the plate and make one pass on either side from heel to toe with a hard Arkansas stone, just to remove the filing burrs and sort of even up the set a little bit. Then I finish the whole thing off with a good coat of paste wax rubbed on with some steel wool, and I rub the handle as well as the plate and the saw bolts. And here is the final product. And I think these kits are a really great way to kind of introduce yourself to tool making. There's not a whole lot of metal work involved, and you really end up with a real nice product in the end, a really nice saw for about half the cost of what it would cost for a new one. Last thing is to give it a try, see how it cuts. Hang it up on the wall and add it to the collection. I should get an awful lot of use out of this saw. I hope you enjoyed the build as much as I enjoyed it.
Thanks for watching.